WP MRR WordPress podcast is brought to you by WP Buffs. WP Buffs manages WordPress websites 24/7 and powers digital growth for agencies, freelancers, and WordPress professionals. Join our white label program, and by next week, you could be offering 24/7 white label website support to your clients and passively growing your monthly recurring revenue. Or become a WP Buffs affiliate to earn 10% monthly payouts every month for the lifetime of every client. And finally, if you're looking to sell your WordPress business or website, check out the WP Buffs acquisition unit. Learn more about all three at WPBuffs.com.
All right, we are live on the pod this week with Melanie Phung. Melanie, tell folks a little bit about what you do with WordPress or in the WordPress space.
Hey, Joe. I'm an SEO and content strategy consultant. I work directly with clients, but also with website developers and full-service agencies, and I help them develop strategies for building better websites that help them achieve their goals and build long-term, incremental, sustainable traffic, targeting qualified audiences and making sure that they're set up to do that, both like via one-term project engagements or long-term engagements, but really I'm all about transparency and teaching my clients how to fish. So helping them learn how to do SEO and transferring my expertise so that they can achieve their goals.
Nice, cool. Does that mean you're kind of in the middle of like teacher / consultant and actually service provider? Like, do you kind of provide both of those in like one package, or do you kind of sell separate packages? Like, I'll teach you how to do this, or I'll do it for you.
Yeah, I love that question. So I don't really think in terms of packages. So if you go to my website, there's nothing on there about like, here's what typical pricing looks like, because I really like to get to know what each client needs and where they're at. So strategy for me is about defining objectives and tactics and resourcing. And as you can imagine, for every organization, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit business, those look completely different. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all list of services that everyone benefits from. And because of their resourcing and how, sometimes a client will have an entire marketing department. Sometimes there'll just be one person there. Sometimes I'm working directly with the client, and sometimes I work with a development agency. It's different every time. So I don't really have packages, but I do try, as much as possible to give my clients, as much information and the resources they need to continue the work after we're done. Whether they're able to do that, that it might not always be the case, that they can take the ball and keep running with it, but they have what they need and nothing should be a surprise to them.
Yeah, cool. Are you a kind of solo team? Is it just you running things, or do you have some folks either on your team or maybe some consultants or some contractors working with you, or is it just you?
I run, what I call a very specialized boutique agency. So yes. It's mostly me, and I have the flexibility to bring in very sort of high-level partners or subcontractors or help specific to each project. So when clients work with me, I figure out if me and my virtual team are a good fit, and then I put together a team that's specific to that project. And that allows me to bring in only like really high caliber people, and I'm not trying to fit, round pegs into square holes or vice versa. And I'm not training junior people to get caught up on like a whole new industry or a whole new set of needs. Everyone I bring in is a really good fit for that job, and someone that I think is operating at a really high level already. So the answer to that question is kind of sort of a little bit of both. It's mainly me, but then I do rely on other people who are expert in their field to help me out when the project requires.
Yeah, it's funny because I think people look at it like a bigger business like WP Buffs with, dozens of people on the team, and they're like, that's cool, so many people on the team. But from the inside, a lot of times I'm like, sometimes I kind of wish I was a more boutique agency. It's like sometimes I wish I had more like flexibility and was able to move a little faster on things. Like as a small team, like you could get like a really high caliber 2 to 3 person team together to work on a super high level project like in a week Or maybe like a day, you could just like email, some people, hey, you want to work on this project? Yeah, sounds cool. With me, it's a little bit different. So I actually really like this idea of like boutique agency. Like you can run an awesome like business, awesome, like profitable, successful, all that stuff. Business doesn't have to be a big team. I think a lot of people think about team size and they're like team size, like the bigger the team size, the better. And like, I'm always the first to be like, no, like, I think there are a lot of people who run like way smaller businesses that like in a lot of like measurements are actually like a more successful business than WP Buff. So I think that's cool. And you're enjoying the boutique agency life?
I do. I love how flexible it is, right? I can ramp up or ramp down, but with everything, there are trade-offs, right? I could probably list a whole bunch of reasons why doing it your way would be better. It's more stable. Sometimes the people that I want on a team aren't available, and then I have to scramble. Whereas, if I had employees, I'd have not full confidence, but a little bit more confidence that I know what their time looks like and I know how to resource things based on availability. And I don't necessarily have that, but that works for me. And I wouldn't say that it works for everyone, but it works for me, and I hope it works for my clients, and think it would be a good way for people to start out if they were jumping into working for themselves for the first time, or they've been solo, they consider themselves a freelancer, and all of a sudden they want to build a business. I wouldn't say go out and hire a dozen W-2 employees overnight. That's risky, right? So start solo-ish, gives you some flexibility, and then you can decide what you want to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. Slow and steady, I think, is always a good pace. So cool. And before we go any further, I would be remiss in not telling folks about your agency. I don't know if you mentioned it, but Orange Spark Digital, which is just at orangesparkdigital.com. So if people want to check out some of the stuff you're doing over in boutique agency land, they can go check that out.
Thanks,
of course. I always love having like people who are in the SEO world on the podcast, because I'm like a SEO and content like nerd. I like to talk about this stuff a lot. So I guess I'd like to start with like a high level SEO in like 2021. What's going on with clients that you're working with projects you're working on? What's like what do people really need to know in order to be successful this year? Whether you're running SEO for your own website, or maybe some folks out there are helping clients with their website's SEO. Like, what are the big trends you're seeing this year?
Ooh, that's tough, right? People in the SEO industry are obsessed with playing at the margins. What's the latest tip or trick to eke out a little bit more in terms of results, which of course is important when you're a professional and you're working with digitally mature organizations that rely heavily on SEO. But I always encourage people not to forget the fundamentals. So if you don't have a strong foundation, then a lot of the other things don't matter. That said, I think this year there's a lot of talk about things that I would consider fundamentals, which is user experience. Right? A lot of conversation about core web vitals. I always trip over that. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. And that's really Google sending a very strong signal to webmasters and site owners that your site needs to perform and function to a standard that users expect on the internet and on mobile especially. So if your site is slow, if it's confusing, if the way that it loads leads to a lot of user experience problems, Google wants you to pay attention to that. And the messaging around that is almost bordering on threatening. It's rare that they make such a big deal about algorithm changes as they've been making about these changes coming up this year. So I would say people are paying attention to that, and they should be. If their sites are not in good shape, they need to be working on it. And these are not easy fixes. This is not like turn a switch. This is like fundamentally think about, how are you building websites?
Yeah, this has been a big challenge for us on our own website, because we do help folks with performance optimization. So this is an area we're diving into with our clients as part of that performance optimization, helping around core web vitals, which you're right, it totally is it's like loading time and performance and time to first paint and LCP, but there's also a lot of user experience stuff in there as well. It's just like in general, it's more than just performance, but it's something we're working on for clients, but also for our own site. And we've found it's been a challenge because we're actually like a bigger site. We're not the biggest site in the world, but we get a lot of organic traffic and we have a pretty big site and like a big foundation to make changes to. So like changing the blog template for better user experience, like was a big project over here, and like getting that load time down so that we could submit it back to Google Search Console as like, hey, could you recrawl these pages because we made some improvements there and you said that these were bad URLs, or you said these were needs improvement URLs. So even us, we're working on that pretty hard as well. Is that something you found that clients have been asking a lot about this year for you when people come to you for work?
For my clients, I wouldn't say that they've been asking a lot about it. I've been telling them a lot about it. And to be clear, I'm not a developer. So I hope that they listen to me because they don't think that, I standing to profit, right? I'm not saying like, hey, pay me lots of money to fix these things for you, right? I am, sort of a trusted voice because of that. And I'll make recommendations, right? But these foundational things can seem so overwhelming. A lot of people want quick fixes and they're like, can you just do something for me? And sometimes, the answer is, you've had this website for, going on 7-8 years and it's so bloated and you have so many plugins. Like, this is a project. And if they haven't scoped that, if that wasn't on the roadmap, it's a bit of a challenge to get them to prioritize it. So unfortunately, my specific clients have not necessarily been reaching out to me saying, what do we need to do? But I try to be proactive and let them know, here are a couple of things that you should start with. Really try to find a way to work with your developers to address these things. And if they have any questions, let's get on a conference call and chat and see how we can prioritize.
Yeah, I think like terminology like Google Core Web Vitals is more, people know it in the SEO space, but some of the clients may not know, like they know the language, like I want users to have a good experience on my website, or I want my website to be faster, but they don't sometimes know the actual intricacies of what it entails to make those improvements in like the important measurements, which is like you want Google to make sure they see your website as fast or as performant or as good user experience. That means performing well in Google Core Web Vitals. So I can totally see clients just kind of using different terminology than Core Web Vitals.
Well, and they think, well, it's been fine up until now, so why do I need to invest in making big changes?
Yeah, I think that's actually a challenge we have kind of with our sales process too, because like our best clients at WP Buffs, like our best, website management subscription clients and white label partners are the people who understand the investment in the long term. Yes, I'm going to pay you money to like, not only to like make my website better in terms of like being maybe like thinking about it more as like being offensive, but also in terms of like being defensive. It's like, what if in 6 months there's a Google update and, I was doing some bad spammy link stuff and I lose, 50% of my organic traffic. Like, that's bad. But like, you kind of have to play a little bit defensively to make sure that doesn't happen, right? You want to run a good website, but it's also just about, hey, let's not overcommit to something that doesn't make sense, and let's invest in something. Let's invest in Melanie because she's going to tell us, no, you shouldn't buy those links,
Exactly. The way that I like to think about it is if you had a house and you had money that you could spend on doing some remodeling and putting some new tile in the bathroom, like that's a great use of money if you've budgeted for it. But if someone comes in and says, your water heater's busted and if you don't fix it, you're going to flood your house and cause a lot of damage, or you have a new roof that needs, that's sprung a leak or something. Sure, you might want the new bathroom tile because it looks good and that's what you had your heart set on, but maybe don't focus so much on making your website pretty. Like, work on fixing the things that could cost you a lot moving forward if you don't fix it, right? So I would rather that you fix the hole in your roof so that you don't cause damage later on. But if your roof is fine, then I'm not going to tell you to go place it, right? I don't want you to spend money you don't want to spend.
Yeah. You've also kind of mentioned some of what's most important around SEO, and a lot of it may not be in like, what are the newest tips and tricks? Some of that may just be kind of shiny object syndrome. A lot of what's most important in SEO is really being at, having a good core, a good foundation, doing the fundamentals right? It's like a professional athlete. Yeah, maybe they can do some crazy things you never seen anybody do before, but they can do that because their fundamentals are so solid, right? They can do the basic stuff at an extremely high proficiency rate. And I think it's probably somewhat similar with a lot of things, but definitely SEO. I'm trying to think of like a example of someone who we could like advise, like someone who is maybe helping with SEO, maybe who's someone who's in your position. I know we have listeners who are kind of SEO agency or marketing agency. What are the fundamentals that you focus on in terms of like a new client that you're working with? So someone comes in and wants to work with you. I'm sure there's some context because everybody's a little different, but what are those core things you're looking for in terms of like, this is a pillar of something we're going to need to focus on in order to be successful, not just to drive more traffic and more high quality traffic in the next quarter, but in the next, 5 years.
Mm-hmm. So there's two tracks that I think are both very important. There's the technical foundation. So if you are building your house on a pit of sand, you're going to have a much harder job. Right? So first we look at basic technical SEO foundational stuff. Is your site discoverable? Is it crawlable? Is it indexable? Are you signaling to Google what the site should be crawled? Are there spider traps? Are you causing a lot of confusion and inefficiencies in crawling and indexing? So there's that. You need that. Then you need to signal to Google what the site is about. If you do a bad job of explaining aboutness with your technical foundation and your information architecture, that's something that needs to be fixed. And those are the kinds of fixes that sometimes clients like because like I tell them what to do and then they do it. And, usually they see very good results very quickly, but then the hard work starts, right? Okay, so now you have a foundation. Now you need to build a process and a culture of thinking about SEO as a channel that needs some love and attention. And that's where a lot of psychology comes in, right? Because you can tell an engineer, fix this problem, and here's how your solution will need to pass QA. That's easy. It's like fairly binary, like very little in SEO is binary, but that's kind of easy, right? Like you have this problem, here's how to fix that particular issue. Yeah, like mostly, yes or no. But then the psychology comes into play when we ask organizations to rethink their messaging. A lot of organizations like to tell users what the organization wants them to know. Like, this is what we do. You should like us. But never giving them like that hook of like, we understand what you, the user, needs. And we need to completely flip our mindset and approach content and marketing from the point of view of what do the users need? How do we meet them where they are? How do we answer questions that users already have? Because that's how search works, right? Google is an answer engine, not a keyword engine. Users type something into Google and they have an implicit, sometimes explicit question, but it's always a question, right? That's why Google calls them queries. Because even if you're typing a statement into Google search, what you're really trying to do is find an answer to a question. And organizations with their content need to provide answers to the questions that users are asking if they're targeting SEO, like in the SEO channel. So that's a lot of training, a lot of mindset, a lot of rethinking how they approach content development and how they craft what they do. So fundamentally at a high level, that's where I try to start.
Yeah, the technical piece makes a lot of sense to me. I'm thinking of like, it feels like it opens up a whole can of worms for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much there. There's like, okay, do I have my sitemap installed? Do I have that like hooked into Google Search Console? What is my, having, Google Analytics installed so I can see what's going on my website in terms of like bounce rate. Is my bounce rate bad? Is the user experience good? And then also from a technical standpoint, there's like on-page SEO as opposed to off-page SEO. So it's like, do I just need to install like Yoast or Rank Math or just have an SEO plugin to make sure all my settings are correct? How do I set up so that like Google makes sure that they're crawling my site? I don't have like some no indexes on pages I don't want, right? There's like so much in there. Is there like a way to build a website from a technical standpoint using a theme or a template, or even Gutenberg. I know a lot of people are starting to use Gutenberg more often, page builders. Is there a way to use those to build a website that would make it more or less like technically SEO friendly? Because I know there are some like theme shops that are like, we sell SEO friendly themes. Is that like a real thing, or is that like could you actually like buy a theme that's going to help more with SEO or not, or is that not really the case and there's like a lot more to it than that?
You're hitting on one of my trigger points, Joe. I love it. Great question. I think there's certainly things that you can do to put yourself at a very strong disadvantage. And so I do think, that theme developers are really doing their best when they're selling something that is, called an SEO friendly theme. I think the intention there is very good. The execution, differs from developer to developer. But if it's fast and uses semantic markup and uses all of the best practices that are sort of inherent in a lot of the way that WordPress as a platform is built, that can lay a really strong foundation, but that's not strategy. Right? So you can build a theme that has good URLs, and you can hook in plugins or tools that generate sitemaps and allow you to configure robots.txt and no index and all of those good things. And that's all necessary, but that's not sufficient. And if the organization behind the site doesn't have a strategy and doesn't know what they're trying to communicate and who their audience is and what their unique value proposition is that makes them better than the competition, no amount of really clean, fast code is going to get you organic search traffic. So it's necessary, but not sufficient. I've seen websites that have shot themselves in the foot because the content was decent, but completely not crawlable, indexable, not renderable, right? So you don't want that, right? So WordPress, as a foundation, is pretty good to begin with, and then you can build themes that are faster, slower, more bloated, less bloated, but none of that negates the need to actually have a strategy. Who are you targeting? What questions are you answering? Who's your audience? Are you saying anything useful, right? That's not a problem that technology can fix.
Yeah. I feel like this is a challenge that a lot of service providers have that provide kind of maybe more like singular services or more focused services, because marketing is all so interconnected. It's like, well, you want to do SEO. Well, okay, sure. You want to drive some traffic to your website, but that traffic's got to do something once it gets to the website, or else what's the point of doing SEO? Okay, so you have to make sure user experience is good. You have to make sure you're really having strategy to think about how you're delivering your copy and how you're selling your product. Is your product even something? Is your product even a thing or so people want? That people will buy, right? It's all comes back to having a strategy, and I think that actually makes it really cool. That's kind of, I feel like, where you're positioning yourself and your agency is kind of a digital consultancy in terms of I don't just offer this package or that package. I offer you winning, or you being successful, and let's figure out together how to get there. So I dig it.
Yeah, it really is about consulting and collaboration for me. And I'll be the first to admit that I don't do everything. I think it's important, as service providers, whether you're a web developer or a marketing agency, you do SEO or whatever, that you're clear about what you do. And that doesn't mean stay in your lane and only ever be in your lane, but it means be clear and understand for yourself what you offer to clients. And if that's not something you're good at, then bring in a partner. You don't have to do everything. Developers don't also need to be full service SEOs if they don't want to be. If they want to be, then that's two different jobs. It's not the same job, right? It's not being an SEO as opposed to developing SEO friendly themes is not a service of here's some code and I'm going to hand it off to you, the client, and now you, the client, have to figure everything else out. Right? If you're working with a client and they want more of that consulting, then refer them out or work with someone in the same, if you're in a position like me, someone like me, or an agency like mine, don't say that you do development work if you don't do development work. Right? And I don't do paid search, so I wouldn't go around pitching myself as full service. I also do performance marketing because that's a completely different field, and those fields deserve the respect of being like their own full-fledged things that require expertise. So that's my soapbox. SEO friendly themes are a thing, but it's not a full package. It's not sufficient to succeed in SEO.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. How do you get new clients yourself at Orange Spark Digital? I checked out the website a little bit, and you have some resources, how to critical SEO mistakes to avoid when relaunching your site. You have some SEO FAQs for Google Search Console set up. Are those things you're kind of using as like lead magnets, or do you work more on like a referral basis? I know as a boutique agency, you may not have 1,000 clients, and you probably don't need 1,000 clients, but what's your main resource for attracting new clients?
So for me, it's referrals, and that's why I like being the size that I am in terms of an agency and the flexibility, because I do work almost entirely off of referrals. I don't do a lot of lead gen. A lot of what I have very few things on my website. I am not do as I say, not as I do. My website is not a big lead funnel for organic search. What I have published on the site are things that I'm constantly telling clients. So I put them up on my website so that I would have to stop retyping emails and I could just send Melanie's most common talking points to my clients or my prospects as a link as opposed to writing an email. Yeah. So that's my little secret.
We're doing the same thing. We just launched a help center so that we can stop telling people the same thing over and over again and have people be able to search and do it all themselves, because that happens with us too. I'd like to dive a little deeper into that referral model though, because I think with many people running smaller agencies or boutique agencies, I think there's a lot of talk around like how do you influence growth? How do you create systems so you can grow and scale a business? But I think in a lot of cases, maybe most cases, especially if you're a small agency, if you have pretty good referral model, like you don't need anything else, nor do you probably want anything else. You could actually probably like keep running your agency for another 30 years, 50 years if you wanted to, right? Just based off of referrals. So I guess my question is, maybe the secret to having a good referral model is just being a really great partner to your clients and having your clients really love you and doing great work. I'm sure that's a significant part of it, or else you probably wouldn't get referrals. But is there anything you do to try to entice referrals a little better, or anything you do to try and push your clients a little more towards, hey, is there anybody else who you think may want to work with me?
It's always a challenge to ask for referrals, and that's the business side, right? So like being a small solo-ish boutique agency, you're always threading the needle and doing that balancing act between like being expert at the thing that you do versus trying to run a business, which is maybe not necessarily what you want to be doing. So finding that right balance, and sometimes that means, depending on your personality, taking yourself out of your comfort zone and asking for referrals, asking for other opportunities, going back to previous clients and asking them if they have other projects that they need help on. I mean, there's a couple of things that make it easier for me, trying to operationalize things a little bit. I know other people do a much better job at this than I might, but at the end of an engagement, sending a survey, asking for like honest feedback, because I actually want to know what my clients thought the strengths and weaknesses of the engagement were, and then asking for a testimonial in that case. And, if the testimonial is good, then saying like, would you mind if I shared this? Or would you mind sharing this with other people? Or in the survey form saying, can you think of some other organizations that you could introduce me to? Or if you were looking for other services like mine, where are some of the communities that provide resources like that? Could you invite me? So those are some of the things that make it seem less awkward and don't make you feel like you're setting yourself up for rejection if you ask it that way. The other thing, if I may add to that, is that I also have a couple of different models for how I work, right? I work directly with clients, but I also work with partners who are, design and development agencies or who provide complementary services. So in that case, it's just a matter of keeping those networks warm and saying, hey, do you have any other projects coming up where we could partner together? Or have you heard of anything that wasn't a good fit for you, but you think that an introduction might yield something? So working a couple of different angles tends to work. And then being out there in the community. I really like I like helping and I like sharing knowledge, and then your name goes out there. You've done, if you do some speaking events like a WordCamp or something and you publish some things, then your name starts to circulate as a resource or as an expert in different communities, and you get referrals from people you hadn't even heard of. It's like, several degrees of separation. And by the time they reach out to you and they say they were referred, you actually don't know who those people are anymore. But, that's one way that the word gets out. Yeah.
Looking at your website now and kind of checking out the testimonials page, you mentioned there's not a ton on the website. And I'm looking at the website and I'm actually I feel like I can take a breath when I look at your website. It's actually kind of refreshing not having a ton of stuff on the website. When I see what I want to work with Melanie, I see your testimonials page and it's okay, she's worked with the World Bank, she's worked with PBS and NPR, and then you have some great testimonials here, 8 testimonials, and then there's just a get in touch area, and it's very simple. I'm comparing your site to our site. I'm wow, our site's there's a lot of stuff on our site. Maybe we need to just cut out half that stuff. It's not super important. Maybe the most important part is focus on the work, and then minimalist, things that are most important for people want to see. Oh, she works with some great companies. People have great things to say about her. Maybe I should get in touch. So I dig it too.
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
Cool. Okay, we've talked about SEO trend sort of stuff. We've talked about some foundations sort of things. We definitely have folks out there who are website builders, whether they're agencies or whether they're freelancers, or maybe they wouldn't even call themselves that. Maybe they're really just how do I get into WordPress and I build a website. I want to put a website together. Let's talk about maybe a rebuild for a website, because I think that's what a lot of clients are going to come to folks with in terms of new projects. I need to rebuild a site. I have an existing site. It's cool, but it was built in, 2004 and I need a new website. And, I want to really start my digital presence. So it probably makes sense to get a new website and then make that the foundation of stuff we do moving forward. So from an SEO standpoint, what are the things you usually look out for? Maybe, or mistakes. I know you have a post on your website about mistakes too, but things to look out for in terms of, I'm going to start a rebuild. What are some of those things I have to focus on?
I'm always nervous when I hear organizations talking about a redesign and they're just focused on aesthetics. Right? They don't like the way
the beautiful website. I want a beautiful website.
The old website looks old and dated. I want something that looks better. That makes me nervous because then I worry that they're not thinking about what the goals are and what's worked for them in the past. Sometimes these old and not very attractive looking websites have a lot of history and they've been performing well, right? So one of the sort of sad truths about the SEO world is that a lot of old websites perform very well because they're old, right? They've been around a long time. They've had time to build authority and a lot of links. And by rebuilding, one of the pitfalls is that you might be breaking something that's been working a really long time. And so you have a lot of traffic, you rebuild a new site from the ground up, all new URL structure, all new content strategy, and you lose everything that was working for you before. So not thinking about redirects is one of the biggest mistakes I've ever seen. Right? Not looking at content performance, which of your pages have been performing the best, regardless of whether you like them or not, and then getting rid of those, moving them, changing them dramatically. A lot of website strategists who don't have a background in SEO really like to talk about everyone's short attention spans these days. And so they'll advise their clients to aggressively cut down on the content. They're the content is too long. No one wants to read it. But the length of the content was one of the things that made it better than what else is out there. So they'll say, edit it down. No one has the patience to read more than 300 words. Well, okay, but now you're not saying anything that is interesting or unique or differentiated. there's thousands of other web pages in the world that talk about your topic in more than 300 words. So now you don't have credibility and authority anymore. So not being strategic about website redesigns is one thing. There's a big trend towards single page applications and building things in React and JavaScript. Not great for SEO, right? It might be pretty. It might have a lot of like cool effects that you like. You might like the way that it handles better on the back end, but not great for spiders. And so, you don't want to write content for robots, but you do need to build code architecture that robots understand if you want to play in their world. So those are a couple of big things that make me nervous about redesigns.
Yeah, that kind of brings me to another question around kind of content length, because you kind of talked a little bit about people cutting down content. I've always really liked longer content because I always felt like people could read as much as they want to. And as long as you have kind of like some hotkeys at the top or like a little menu at the top that says like, yeah, skip down to this section to go read more about that if you want to, like read just about that. You can give people the opportunity to read short if they want to, but also have a long, super authoritative piece of content that hopefully will be the best piece of content about that topic on the web. That's like kind of the direction we've gone in terms of content length. Like I think the length of our average content has gotten longer over the past like 6 months, year, as opposed to the time before, because we've just been leaning in this direction.
And is it working for you?
It's working in some cases. We do found that we have more impressions. We show up for more searches across the web, but some of the challenge we do have is that the performance of a single page or like the load time of a single page, if it's so long, it does sometimes no matter what you're doing. It's like you do all the lazy load stuff, you do all the speed optimization stuff, but it's still got like 40 images there. And like our COO, Nick, complains to me about this all the time. He's like, I keep being like, can we make it faster? He's like, you got to cut the content down. And I'm like, but it's like, we can't do that. Like, what else can we do? There's got to be something else. But we find that we struggle a little bit in that wrestling between content length and writing the most informative piece of content possible, not just for length's sake, but for completedness' sake. But that wrestling a little bit with performance optimization. I don't know if that's something you found with long pieces of content, but I could use some advice personally if you've encountered anything like that before.
So the first thing I was going to mention was, what about lazy loading? So you've already thought about that.
Yeah.
But the thing that I thought was really interesting as I was listening to you explain the challenges that you talked about, length versus performance. Immediately my mind went to a different place about what performance meant, but you meant speed optimization. I was thinking, like, does the content help you achieve your goals? Like in terms of conversion, right? Like, does the content perform to your business objectives? So that's an interesting conversation, right? Like you can be talking to clients or partners or your CEO and actually not even be having the same conversation and not realize it. Right? So I thought that was interesting in terms of definitions. So I always go back to, like, does the content help you achieve your goals? If the page is a little slower than you'd like, but you're generating a lot of leads and interest or whatever, session engagement, then it's performing fine, right? If all of the other pages that you're competing with in the SERPs are performing the same or worse, then you don't need to be faster. So it's really all about a balancing act in the business objectives that you have. So nothing is in a vacuum. You're competing against other sites on the web. And if everyone else is writing long and loading a little bit slower, then you're not necessarily at a disadvantage.
That's a good point. I really like what you said about the performance, because that happens a lot. It's like performance can mean different things. And that's probably the first step to a conversation, is making sure everybody's on the same page and making sure that you know what the point of a page is. The point of SEO is not to drive traffic to your website. The point is to drive qualified traffic to your website that is going to take another action, which is hopefully eventually like monetize your site however it's supposed to monetize, whether that's like affiliate stuff or whether that's paying you for your SEO services or paying you for your website management services. If you drive 1 million visitors a year and nobody does anything, they all bounce from that page, who cares? They're not doing SEO very well. So I think that's a good place to wrap up for today's episode. But before we truly finish, why don't you tell folks, Melanie, where they can find you online, your agency stuff online, all that stuff?
Yeah, you can find me at orangesparkdigital.com and twitter.com/Melanie Phung. That's MELANIEPHUNG.
Very good. Cool. And last but not least, I always ask our guests to ask our listeners for a little Apple podcast review. So if you wouldn't mind asking folks to leave us a quick review, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. If you are listening and you haven't already left a review and a 5-star rating, what's stopping you? Do it now.
WPMRR.com/review redirects you right there if you are on a Mac or Apple device. You can leave a star rating, but you can also leave a comment. Tell Melanie and I something you learned from this episode. Gives us guidance on what content got good momentum going, good listenership going, what we should do more topics on in the future. And I do read every review that gets left, so it does bring a nice bright spot to my heart as well. If you are a new listener to the show, we've got 150-ish episodes in the hopper. So if you have a certain topic you're having a challenge with or something that's just on your mind, just go to WPMRR.com/podcast. There's a search bar right there, so you can search for whatever you're having a challenge with. I'm sure we've had an episode about it in the past. That is it for this week on the WPMRR WordPress podcast. We will be in your earbuds again next Tuesday. Melanie, thanks again for being on. It's been real.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye, everybody.